Over the years, I've heard people tell me that if there is some type of change that you feel you need to make to a game, likely you should just go look for another game that does the thing that you are looking to do. Well, when it comes to old school Dungeons and Dragons, I would say those people are wrong. And there's a lot of nuance to this whole topic. Not just that. What about raw rules as written? Something pushed when Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1st edition came out with a thing called tournaments. They made the game rules as written to keep things consistent for those who took part in tournament play. Rules as written was not a focus or approach in original or BECME or even the home version of AD&D 1st edition or 2nd edition AD&D. That was a new thing that was here for a little while, and Tournament and Raw was dropped by the time 2E came out on the market. You know, I'll hear people say, if you make too many changes, it stops being Dungeons and Dragons. And I would agree, there's a bit of a structure there you want to maintain. But how much people say you got to maintain to keep it as is, I don't always agree. Actually, I don't agree at all. I think that Dungeons and Dragons is less of an overall game when you think about it, and more of a generic toolkit made for changes and adaptability, and made that way so a company could keep making a variety of products for that system. You know what Gary Gygax said? He said the idea was for you, the home person, the guy who runs the game, to master the game through rules as written, and then he expects that you will make changes, that we all will, and I mean tweak, not just optional stuff, but actually tweak the core rules to get what we want. We may find that we like combat a certain way, and through a few minor changes, we can get combat to work in a certain way for our table. He was completely okay with this. All he wanted you to do was first master the game so you could understand the changes that you're making, and clearly he thought you were very capable, just like him and his design team were capable of making the same changes. We go from 1E to 2E, dropping the battle metric system, going purely THAC0. Well, if they can do it, guess what? The guy at home who masters the game is just as capable of making such changes without breaking what it is we call D&D. And if we can make changes from one edition to another and keep a feel, maintain a thing with major changes, not optional rules, but actually core tweaking of the system, but maintain the feel of old school D&D, well, obviously, it's possible. That means you can do the same thing at home. You can make a lot of changes and still maintain the feel and that sort of structure of play. You know what was great about old school D&D? Outside of that raw and tournament gimmick? It was made for adapting things to it. To making it sing like you want it to sing. You didn't have to go buy a new game. You could make this work whatever way you wanted to make it work. That wasn't a broken element of the game. That was something that was the game itself. It was made to be bent, cracked, re-put together. Right? It was made for that type of experimentation. It wasn't telling you that you need to go find another game that does something else. It's saying, even if it doesn't initially do what you want, you can make this do what you want. And it's made so you can make it do what you want. Now I'm talking about old school. I'm not talking about 3rd edition, 4th edition, or 5E from Wizards of the Coast. They went pure raw rules as written. And they're very exact on their game. You know, I like the old school where there wasn't something exactly written for every detail, but you could just assume things. The character stabs a monster. Another player says, well, before they take the blade out, I want to kick the blade in. Well, in a rules as written game, You stab in, you take out. There's no option for that. The player would, the initial stabbing player with the character would have to announce something like that in the process before you could get to that step. Though, you see elements of this in Castles and Crusades, and you see it in Old School. The DM, without a lot of overall controlled structure over them, like a rules as written chain around them, could do what they want and make such free decisions. But if you're being too exact, you can't do that. There's almost no game outside of D&D that is made in this generic way on purpose. Again, TSR made it. They made a game that they could apply new ideas to, bend the game to new concepts, add new rules, adjust, everything. And you can adapt so much. Go out and run Gangbusters, another game made by TSR. What do you learn? You learn to manage reaction of the world. These are skills not always that well taught in D&D, but you can learn anything outside of D&D and then adapt it to old school Dungeons and Dragons. You can learn how to pace and react with the Gangbusters experience. You could go to top secret, look at teamwork and strategy. Really push concepts from that game onto your players. The type of missions that would cause that type of gameplay. You can go to a game like Bushido, look at how the social interaction works, and then apply that type of social setting, those social rules, to an old school Dungeons and Dragons game. Anything you encounter from any other game, you could pretty much adapt to D&D. But that wasn't true the other way around. D&D could take on anything. You like World of Darkness? You could do that with Dungeons and Dragons. You could do a lot of it. You could do anything with old school D&D because it was made for you. Gary Gygax seemed to like the idea of a universal system. It's something he worked on when he left TSR. He liked the idea of adaptability, of doing what you want, making the game yours. It was less important to him that it was, this is what D&D is. It's whatever D&D is whatever it is to you and your group and your table. And it's made to be a toolkit so you can achieve what you want. Not so you bend to the game like some slave in Raw. They liked marketed settings. They liked all that. But did Gary ever think you should bow to the lore of a setting? No. It was all about you and what you want. Empowering to you and your table. It was about your creativity, not you bowing to somebody else's creativity. And I like that, and that concept, and that freedom, and that focus on valuing what it is you bring. Not what you learn and bend your knee to. That's why I don't care about changes WotC does. That's why I don't care what they do at Greyhawk or what they're going to do at Dragonlance. Doesn't matter to me. The lore of a world setting means nothing. I care about the gaming experience. I'm not religious about D&D or the hobby and the way many people are. So with Luke Gygax now going to work pretty much full-time for Wizards of the Coast, I'm going to say this. When it comes to him taking on that type of work, a lot of people are calling him a sellout. I disagree. I don't care what WotC said about Gary for years. I thought it was in poor taste, to be honest. I thought it was pathetic, but it was something I ignored. But it wasn't my father. I don't own the history. Dungeons and Dragons doesn't belong to me. I'm not part of a cult. So when WotC, Wizards of the Coast, decided to apologize to Luke Gygax, I said, well, it's his family that they went after. It's his father they talked about. It's on him how he reacts to that. And they made a public apology. And if he deems that good enough, that's good enough. And then after he accepts an apology, which I felt like he should demand something like that before he ever just works for them in this way. What he does working for them, the fact that they run Dungeons and Dragons, I thought, well, there's Luke Gygax. Yeah, of the Gygax family working on Dungeons and Dragons. That's not a disgrace. That's not a betrayal of his family. That's not a sellout at all. He's as capable as anybody else working on the games. He spent years playing them. We're only talking about games here. That's all it is. His father taught him a lot. He understands a lot. Enough that he could go do something. And if he can achieve it, let him achieve it. We're only talking about games. We're not talking about science or medicine. It's how much of a professional do you need to be? I've spent years running thousands of gaming sessions for old school D&D for thousands of players. I'm as capable as any staff member that worked for TSR at making the game, designing the game, doing all that. Not a single staff member of TSR that's still alive today is any more capable of working on D&D than I am. So if I can achieve it, if I can be on their level, and trust me, I am, I'm sure we can count Lou Gygax as being good enough. What has he done? What have they done? They made games. Doesn't matter. Right? So Luke, it's up to him how he takes all this in. And there's nothing about selling out. Look, I admit, would I think it's in poor taste for him to not get a public apology and go forward? Yeah, I think that was required. And I think WotC understood that was the right move. So what if Luke doesn't make them get on their knees even further in the process? But in a way they are. They apologized to him, and now they're praising Gary as they should have done for a long time. If that's good enough for the family, and good enough for Luke Gygax, it's good enough for me. It's not my daddy, it's not my family, and I don't own Dungeons and Dragons, nor am I part of a cult that thinks they own it, thinks they have some ownership over that entire thing. They don't. So Luke Gygax is not a sellout. I'd like to see what they're doing with WotC return to that old freehand of D&D, what it was. I don't like the combat. What used to take 20 minutes and work well in old school now takes on average 2 hours to 2.5 hours to work in any WotC edition. I think the combat in the WotC editions is an absolute disgrace and one of the worst mechanical systems in all tabletop role-playing games. I swear. I think WotC, Wizards of the Coast, D&D, the combat is the worst combat, one of the worst systems in any tabletop role-playing game. Period. End of story. I like where we put the work on the talent of the person running the game, and that we just don't let any Tom, Dick, or Harry do it, which was what Raw ended up doing. Rules as written allowed a cockroach to take the place of somebody talented. Same thing with third-party adventures, modules. Why come up with your own ideas? Why develop them through a sandbox format when you can just run a module? And I remember when they redefined what a sandbox is into module gameplay. Sandbox is complete freedom, not some freedom. That's a loose railroad. Any form where there's an end or some form of control is a railroad, be it loose, harsh, tight, overwhelming. It's a railroad. The Temple of Elemental Evil is a railroad. Sandbox isn't some freedom. It's complete freedom. And you develop from that freedom, from what players do. And you can develop adventures tailored to what the players do. You can develop entire settings without buying one, all through sandbox play, and it's really easy. Traveller, the game understood that. That's how Traveller existed without all these things. That's how you did it with OD&D. That's how you did it with early Dungeons and Dragons. But of course, that would threaten the modules and the selling of modules and making money off them. So why not redefine sandbox, which is a threat to your model of modules, into module gameplay? Trick the audience. Lie to them about what it is. Right? I'd like to return to the old school sandbox, freedom, talent. I don't think we're going there, so I think I'll be staying in the old school, run the games the way I've always have. But I do look at some of the work Luke is doing. I'm not big on the lore. some of the old school guys that are calling him a sellout R. So you're telling me you're not going to look at his Greyhawk work, which you could adapt to your old school rules? You're not going to look at the new Dragonlance work that you could adapt to anything old school that you're doing? Hey, if you tell me you just don't like it, you don't like it. But it's not like new people don't have a right to see a different version of something. Alright, I'm just not married to the lore, and I don't care about it. I care about a game. And I don't need their setting. I don't need their NPCs, and I don't need their modules. I'll use Sandbox and develop my own adventures, my own NPCs, and my own settings without any of it, and I will not marry the lore or care about it. And guess what? If Watsy wants to apologize to Luke and he accepts it, that's good enough for me. No selling out at all. There you go. Have a good one.